Hi folks, Daniel here, and today we're going to be talking about wheel spacers. Up next. Now, wheel spacers or wheel adapters are something that is kind of conflicted all over the internet. Some people think they're good and some people think they're bad. Today I'm going to tell you about using wheel spacers, but I am not going to recommend using them, and I'm not going to recommend not using them. That's totally up to you after you've learned what I've got to offer in this video. Alright, so first let's talk about what wheel spacers or wheel adapters are. Wheel spacers are designed to go on your wheel hub so that your wheel can stick out a little bit more. Most people do this for looks. I actually run wheel spacers because my car has a lot of negative camber, and so the wheel is tucked under the fender here a lot, and I don't really like the look of that. So I put a spacer on and it brings the wheel outward a little bit, and it looks a lot better. Just a little bit does a lot, actually. Now, the best way to get a good look of how your wheel sits is, of course, get the proper fitting wheel. Unfortunately, sometimes the wheel that you like, you can't quite get the right width and offset, and so you resort to wheel spacers as a last resort to get the look that you want. Now, there are two types of wheel spacers. There are slip-on types, and they're like this, but they don't have these bolts on here. It's just the spacer part and a center hole. And they would just fit right over your stock lug studs and then around this hub lip here. And that makes them hub-centric. That's really, really important. You can buy wheel spacers that don't fit properly on this section, but this is where a lot of the weight is being supported, so it's really important that you have hub-centric wheel spacers. You can get them really cheap that aren't hub-centric, but I'm going to tell you, those are not the way you want to go. So first of all, the spacer goes on, and now there's some extra space here, and when you put your wheel on, it'll stick out a little more. The other type of wheel spacer is this kind, and it has lug studs built in, and this bolts on to your wheel hub. So basically, you slide it over your stock lug nuts or lug studs, and then it comes with these extra lug nuts that screw in and fit nicely into this recess and bolts on the spacer to the wheel hub. Non-bolt-on spacers are just held in with your wheel. So in this case, these get bolted on, and then your wheel mounts to these new studs here. And then you take your regular lug nuts and you screw on and tighten your wheel down onto that. Then there's wheel adapters, and they would look just like this, except these studs would be in a new position so that you could take a wheel maybe that wasn't designed to fit on your hub and put one of these wheel adapters on, and now the studs are in a place that can fit another type of wheel. And adapters often have a space added in. Now, why would you want one or the other? Well, slip-on spacers, once they go on, of course, they have now given you less lug stud here to work with. So when you screw on your lug nuts after the wheel has been put on, there may not be much thread to get attached, and now these are not as secure as they should be. Not only that, but the wheel is hanging out farther on those lug studs, and that can create more pressure and make them more prone to break. Although most of the weight should be on the hub-centric part, but if you didn't get wheel spacers like that, you're putting a lot of weight possibly on the wheel studs, and that's not what you want. Now, if you get bolt-on kind, now the weight of the wheel isn't so much on there. Of course, it's on the hub-centric part, as you should be shopping that way. But we have a full length of lug stud here for our wheel to bolt onto, and our lug nuts will have plenty to bite onto. Generally, from what I've found in my research, if you go any more than 5mm spacer, you need to get either extended lug studs, the ones that are on your car. So now in some cars these aren't easy to replace. For example, on most GM cars, you got to hammer these out through the back and then hammer them back in, and there's not a lot of room to get them out there, so it can be a pain. Others screw out, and those might be a little easier. But if you don't extend these, again, you won't have enough for your lug nuts to bite onto. So more than 5mm spacer, you should probably get new lug studs, and that's just more labor and more cost. People will generally say that these should at least be able to go 5 full turns onto your wheels to be secure. And more than the 5mm spacer, I think you're going to have a hard time doing that. But they do make something else in case you don't want to extend your lug studs, and that is ET lug nuts. This is a regular lug nut, right? Now, if you look at this, it's kind of flush right here. Well, extended lug nuts will have an extra lip that goes deeper into the hole of the wheel to grab more threads of your lug stud. Now, I already have a hard enough time finding just the right lug nuts for my aftermarket wheels, but for other wheels, it's a little easier to find extended thread lug nuts. Now, if you want to go more than a 5mm spacer, that's when I say you need to go bolt-on. When you go bolt-on, again, you are getting maximum threads because you're getting a whole new set of lug studs to stick your wheels onto. But you can't run this kind of setup on every type of wheel. That's because you see this lug stud here, the original one that came with the car, is sticking out quite a bit. And when you put your wheel back on, there are recesses to kind of overcome this, but on my stock wheels, it's not deep enough, and my stock wheel won't sit flush against this spacer. Notice they're not very deep. They look like to be about 10mm deep. So let's see how they fit whenever we put this wheel on. All right, so now let's take a look. In here you can see that the wheel is not fully seated against the wheel spacer. I'm pushing it all the way in as far as I can, but it's not going to go any farther because the stock lug studs are preventing it from going on. This is a bad setup, and it may not be as obvious as this, so you really want to measure closely. If I had a deeper spacer, a thicker spacer, maybe there'd be less sticking out and then it wouldn't be a problem. Let's take a look at my aftermarket wheel, and we can see that the recesses are much deeper. They look like at least an inch or so. So this is plenty of room for our stock lug studs to go in, while the bolt-on spacer will go through the holes of the wheel. Now, there's one more problem with running a big spacer like this, and that is that you're pushing the wheel outward on the hub, and the hub isn't really designed to carry the weight that far out. It's designed to carry the weight here, right on top, not way out here. And just like anything, when things are farther from the point of rotation, there's a lot more torque there, and it could possibly wear out your wheel bearings sooner. How much sooner? I don't know, man. That's kind of debated. I'll tell you, I've run these spacers for 40,000 miles and autocrossed on them. So far, my wheel hubs and wheel bearings are fine. If they wear out 100,000 miles instead of 120,000 miles or something, am I gonna know? I don't know. But with every modification, you need to know there are consequences, and usually, yeah, parts are gonna wear out faster, and you should expect that. It's not gonna be a catastrophic failure though, unless you really bring them far out. But using wheel spacers is really common, especially in the truck world, but generally if you're racing your car, maybe don't run your wheel spacers. I run them in autocross, but I probably wouldn't run them at the track where I'm doing, speeds over 100 miles an hour. Now you can get spacers that are aluminum or plastic. Some people have great luck with running plastic, but you know what? This is something that I prefer to run aluminum, especially of course if you're gonna get big bolt-on ones like this. They should be nice billet aluminum, not cheap, non-aluminum or poor quality aluminum. You don't want that. This is not something you want to mess around with cheap, in my opinion, but some people have had a great time with cheap parts, I guess. So now that I've talked to you about what spacers, adapters, and bolt-on spacers are about, let's install them on my car. Now, I just recently did new struts and did new brakes, and so I didn't have these on initially, but I'm gonna put them on now. I've used these plenty before. You can see they're plenty dirty, but these are actually cleaned up. They looked a lot worse. It's important to have your wheel spacers nice and clean because this metal surface is going to mate against this metal surface, and any dirt or corrosion in there is going to cause, it's going to have a chance for clicking or squeaking or noises that you don't want. So it's important that both of these surfaces get nice and clean. So I'm going to clean this one up. This one's already cleaned up, and then we can mate the spacer onto here. Let's get to it. All right, first, to install the wheel spacer, once you get wheel off, you just slip it back on here like this. Again, these should be hub-centric, so they should mate with no play. See, I can't really move these left or right, up or down. They can twist, of course, but that's fine. Next, you want to get your new nuts and thread those onto your stock lug studs. Don't get them all tight yet, just get them all started and starting to seat. Now the reason I say that is because you want these to be centered up. You don't want them off to one side or the other. So get them mostly centered from what you can tell, and then get them to start to seat. So at least they are firmly in place. All right, once those in place, you'll need a socket to get them on there nice and tight. And we're gonna torque these down to the same torque setting that your wheel would go on. In my case, 110 foot-pounds. Now, when you try to do this, the whole wheel is going to tend to turn on you. So you need something to stop that from happening. In this case, I'm just gonna use this extension, or you can use a strong screwdriver, and you can jam it into the slots of the brake rotor, like this, and then I'll protect my brake caliper with a rag, and then you should be able to tighten these up. Okay, there's one, and you go in the star pattern, of course, just like you do your wheels. And double check. All right, once you're sure those are completely secure, now it's time to just put your wheel on. All right, now that the wheel's in place, we can put in our stock lug nuts. They should all fit just as they do on the stock studs if you got the right wheel spacers with bolts on them. Of course, you want to get the correct one. For the CTS, for example, these are all 14 by 1.5 threads. So, all right, I'm going to get all these started, and then we'll torque them down. I'm going to use my impact wrench on a very low torque setting to get them mostly seated, and I'm going to support the wheel with my foot. All right, now that those are all on, we can lower the car down and final torque the lug nuts. All right, folks, that's it to wheel spacers. They're pretty easy to install, but most importantly, you need to understand what's going on when you install wheel spacers and that you choose the right kind to minimize any risks. Now, I'm sure that there's gonna be a ton of comments below, and feel free to comment where people are gonna say things that will scare you away from using wheel spacers, and you should consider those comments. But there's also going to be plenty of people that comment below and they say, I've done it for so and so long and such on all these cars, and it's fine. Now, if you decide to get spacers, of course, my biggest recommendations are get quality spacers. I suggest aluminum, not necessarily plastic, and aluminum from a good source. Check with Weapon X Performance, that's where I got these, or Rennick Performance, he sells some as well. You want to get them properly sized for your hub center, so they're hub centric. And you want to get those extended lug nuts or extend your lug studs if you don't get bolt-on spacers. If you're going to get bolt-on spacers, maybe don't go too big. If you really need a big difference, you should probably consider getting different wheels. All right, that's it. I hope you enjoyed this. Be sure to like and subscribe if you found this video helpful. I'll have more how-tos in the future as always. Thanks for watching the Jet Fuel Only channel. See you next time.